Well, Christy was our firstborn, so I was always thrilled about Christy. But Christy was always a very loving child, and she always tried to do what was right. Was not a hard child, disciplinary-wise. She was not a hard child to live with and to deal with and to teach and so forth. But for Christy, I guess that would be the thing that I would be the most outstanding thing. That Christy is hard as full, and she can always help somebody else. She can always help somebody else. She's always been very helpful to us, so that was the case with Christy. It's pretty hard to bring that down into one specific case, but she's been exceptionally helpful to us in our later years. She was helpful to us as she was growing up, but she's been very helpful to us, as all of our kids have been, but she's been very helpful to us. Very considerate and so forth. To watch her, she was not one that did much dating, but we encouraged her to. She was come back home, and we was afraid that she was going to vegetate or something there. We encouraged her to go to Salt Lake and get into a singles ward, which worked out that's where she found her husband. So that was thrilling there, and we had her wedding reception right there in our home, the only one that was within our home, and it was a neat experience to have that in the home and see her with her family grow. Lynn was a little bit different as what we've seen, and I certainly don't want to talk because he's going to listen to this. But Lynn was a little bit different. To us, he was more independent. He's always been that way all of his life. Even when he was not too many years old and we moved to Brigham City, if he wanted something, he wanted a bicycle. 5-speed bicycle. It was a important thing to him. But he didn't come to us and say, I want the money to go get the bicycle. He come to us and says, what can I do to earn it? So he's always been in that kind of, he wanted a pair of harness boots, and that'll be something nobody will understand, but they had a strap over the top of their boot and whatnot. But that's what he did. He went out and he earned it. He didn't, in his schooling, he didn't like a bunch of baloney. He was in kindergarten, and he went to school, and they wanted him to act like an elephant and bend over, and sway his trunk and want to come back. And he says, that's stupid, I'm not going to do that. So he was always very, very realistic in what he was doing. And he tried to take his studies that way too, very realistic with his studies. And there was times he had some real tough times in school, and we had to kind of go and help him out a time or two. And so then when he went to BYU, he always was friends with older boys. And we always appreciated that, but he spent most of his time with them away from home. It wasn't very often that he'd come back home, but that was okay. He used to borrow my car. I got a little Datsun, and him and his friends, they just teased me about buying a lawnmower and all that kind of stuff. But it wasn't long before they was asking if they could borrow the car on a Sunday afternoon. I says, well, which one do you want to take? Well, we want to take the little car. So, but I understood from stories later on that they would take it up in the mountains. But his older friends went down to BYU. And he went down and visited with them, and he come back one summer, the summer after he graduated. He says, "Dad, I so much want to go down to BYU, but I don't think my grades are going to let me go down there." But he says, "I want to go to BYU." I says, "Then put in an application." I says, "The worst thing they can do is tell you no. But put in an application, you might hit the jackpot." So he did. He put in an application and sent it down to BYU. And a little while later, the letter come back and he says, "I don't know whether I dare open this or not." I says, "Open it." And he opened it up, and they had accepted him to come to BYU. And he was so ecstatic. And so he went down to BYU and so forth. But he was his own type of person. He and I, after we got married, he and I went into business together up in Wyoming, and he was a good businesshead, but it got to the point where it wouldn't support both of us. And he come to me and he says, "Dad, this thing just won't support two of us." I says, "Then it's yours." And he says, "What about the equipment?" I says, "It's yours. Go and make your living with it. I'll go and do whatever I can do. But you take over and do the construction business." And so he worked hard at that for a few years, and then he had to go to California, and he's made a huge success. And he's very comforting to visit with and see his perspective on life, and he does very well. But he says, "The Lord has given me much, and if I don't help other people, then I'm afraid he'll take it away from me." So he's generous with his money and does very well. So one of the greatest thrills of my life was when he decided to go on a mission and told us that he was going on a mission. So that was one of the biggest thrills. And then we went over there and got him when he got through. So it was a great thrill to see him, and it's been a big foundation for him all of his life. Cheryl, well, she kind of come along as a surprise package.
Well, I'm glad.
We had Christy and we had Lynn, and we were just kind of getting things working that way, and I had taken on a part-time job selling storm doors. So on a Saturday I was out selling storm doors, and when I come back she told me that she was pregnant. I thought, man, that's 3. I'm going to have a hard time, but I was happy that she was pregnant, and the night she was born, I had had an accident at work and had my nose broke. And I'd caught cold, and that was not good medicine for a broken nose. And I didn't feel very good, and she started having labor pains, and she says, "But I'm not supposed to have this for another month." And I says, "Well, I don't know." So anyway, whatever time it was, so she kept going along. Finally I says, "Noreen, I feel horrible. We either got to go to the hospital and see what this is all about, or I'm going to bed." She says, "Well, we better go up to the hospital." Well, we went up to the hospital, and before midnight, Cheryl was born. And the only thing I got to see with her that night was they brought Noreen out on a gurney, and she had Cheryl wrapped in her arms and her black hair, and I saw her, and she was just a sweet little girl, and I was thrilled to death that we had Cheryl. And she's always been active, and she's a very loving and a great mother and a great grandmother. You just couldn't ask for anything any greater than what she was. She was a little kind of a spitfire at times. her and Connie got into fights, and Connie would tantalize her until she threw something at her. And it was still when we moved out of our house up in Brigham City that there was a hole in the door in the living room where she threw a shoe through it. She threw another shoe through the wall down in Kaysville, but she's always been one that is very loving and very, very compassionate, and to help us wherever she can. She likes to have us come over and visit with her, and it's getting harder and harder for us to go, but she's always been a great pleasure to us in our life. We decided we wanted the fourth child. We wanted another boy. And so she was planned, and Noreen got pregnant along in, I don't remember, February or somewhere in there. And I was then going to data processing school at Stevens Henniger, and as when that time went on, and then I got a job at J.A. Hogle in the first data processing job, and I worked there for a little while, and she was going to a doctor in Salt Lake. Then I got a job offer up in Brigham City at Thiokol, and I said, well, I've got to take this job. I can't pass this one up. So we moved up to Brigham City, and then Noreen still traveled down to Salt Lake to go to the doctor. Well, when she went into labor, why, she was in labor too quick, and he says, you can't make that to Salt Lake. We got to have the baby here. So she went and just hired a doctor, and she was born at what she calls a Band-Aid station. She's the only one that I got to see born.
Really?
Yeah. They would, all of the others, they would never let me get within gunshot of them in the delivery room or anything like that. All of the others, I maybe get to see them for just a flashing minute, going from the delivery room until they picked them up and took them into the nursery. And from there on, I watched all of my kids except Connie through a glass window. Chrissy, I looked at her for a week before I got to hold her.
Really?
Lynn, he was in the hospital for close to a week. All I got to see him was through a glass window. And then Cheryl, she was born up at the LDS hospital up in Salt Lake there. And they whisked her past me and says, here's your daughter. And I took one look at it, Cheryl, like this, and she was gone. And all I got to see her was through the window. It was close to a week. They used to keep me in for about a week. So, and then I saw Connie born, and that was a thrill to me. But then when David was born, it was a week before I got to. But see, they keep me in there, and you couldn't get. The father couldn't even get within gunshot or anybody else. And then all of a sudden one day, why, they release the mother and they hand the baby to you and says, there it is. What the crap? For 4 or 5 days before, if I got around him, it'd kill him, and now you just hand me the baby. But anyway, that was the rules. But Connie, she's such a friendly, and always been such a friendly person. So that's been some of her big tactics, is how friendly she is. They're always good to us. Well, David, I wanted another baby, and hopefully that we get another boy. Doreen didn't know that she was very crazy about having the fifth one, but she later said she knew there was one more. But I was working out at Thiokol, and I come home one day and I says, if I get a raise, will you get pregnant? And she says, well, I don't know how you're going to get a raise, but if you get a raise, we'll have another one. So the next week I brought the paper home, and I knew I was getting it. I handed her the paper and I says, here's my raise. So anyway, we went ahead, and he was planned. But once again, I was in the labor room with them, but as soon as it come time, I was shuffled off to the father's room, and Noreen had to tell them, and no, we never knew what they was going to be ahead of time either. But she called over her microphone and says, it's a boy, and that was a thrill. Because that kind of balanced out our family. We had 2 boys and 3 girls, and I made a nice mix. But about just a few months after he was born, then he started getting sick, and he was sick so much. And when he was sick, he wouldn't let anybody else hold him but his mother. And once in a while, he'd let me hold him for a few minutes, but he was attached to her. So he became very attached to his mother. And after he got his tonsils out, then he became somewhat civil, but he was still very much attached to his mother. But he's been really good to be around. He's different. He was different personality than Lynn, but he was always willing to help, and he worked for us. I remember helping him become an Eagle Scout, worked with him, and both Lynn and David became Eagle Scouts. Then he was planning on going on a mission, and in the fall of the year we went deer hunting up in Utah, just next to Wyoming. And so he went out around and was hunting, and I was hunting, and then we met. So we sit there and just had a father and son chat, and it was fun. And I told him, he says, well, I guess I'll be going. I said, David, before you know it, your time will be here and you'll be gone, you'll be on your mission. And it was, he left the end of July on his birthday. So his birthday, he had his 19th birthday while he was in the MTC, and he learned Spanish, and he worked really hard at it. And when he left, I think it was in September or October, to go to Chile, he says, Dad, here's your birthday gift. I passed all of my lessons off memorized in Spanish. So he was always very, and he is to this day, he's always good at coming and helping things. He come here the other day and mowed the lawns and trimmed everything up. And so he's always been really good that way, and but him and his mother's always had a very close relationship.